Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another negative space panel. Very happy to be here in the new year, starting off with an amazing chat. I won't keep you too long with my announcements. What we got going on so far, our women's competition opens up next week, Monday, January 9th. Submissions are open. They run for 2 months, so make sure you get your scripts in. We'll also be announcing our mentors for that in the next week or two, so keep an eye out for that. That's all I got. So get ready for an awesome chat here. I'll bring in our usual badass, amazing host, Josh. Take it away.
Thank you, Noel. I feel like my title gets better every time you introduce me, so let's keep that trend going. As he mentioned, I'm Josh. I'm your host. Like you said, it's gonna be a great chat. So we're gonna get started. We're gonna meet our panelists. Real quick note though, if you do have questions throughout the discussion, drop those in the Q&A. There's a button down there on your Zoom dashboard that says Q&A. Ask them as soon as you have them. If they're relevant to the current discussion, I'll ask them right away. If not, I might save them towards when they're more in flow with the discussion. But enough of that. Today we are talking with two panelists. So let's meet our panelists now. The first one, Sara Alfageeh, is a Jordanian-American illustrator and creative director in San Francisco. She is passionate about history, teaching, girls with swords, and the spaces where art and identity intersect. Her award-winning debut graphic novel, Squire, is on shelves everywhere. An upcoming picture book, Not Yet, The Story of an Unlikely Skater, is in the works. Sara, welcome aboard.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited for today.
Of course, thank you for being here. And our second panelist, Nadia Shammas, is a Palestinian-American comics and games writer from Brooklyn, New York. She's the writer and co-creator of Squire, a Harvey Award-winning YA Middle Eastern fantasy graphic novel. Nadia is also known for her work on Ms. Marvel, Stretch Thin, and her clients include Marvel, DC Comics, IDW Publishing, First Second, Tor Nightfire, Penguin Random House, and HarperCollins. Hello, Nadia. Welcome aboard. So thank you both for being here. I want to start sort of where we always do with your creative origin story, more or less, sort of that original impulse that you had to be a creative, to go this route. So I'll toss it up to Sara, you first.
Yeah, sure thing. I feel like I was kind of late to it all, actually. Most artists that I know, they've been saying, oh, I've been drawing since I could hold a pencil and that kind of thing. That wasn't the case for me. I taught myself how to draw in the back of like a math class when I was 17 in high school. So got a D+ in pre-calc that year, which is fine. But on the other hand, I learned how to draw anime characters. And I have been a lifelong reader of comics, and I've always loved art, anime, manga, but it never really clicked for me that one, it was a job, and that like quote unquote like normal people could learn how to do it, because I had no example of artists in my own life. Not a lot of creative professionals coming out of the Arab community or immigrant communities in particular. So I went to school actually for psychology, and that lasted maybe 2 weeks before I ended up switching into art. And that happened because Ms. Marvel Volume 1 had debuted that summer, and I had read it and really, really fallen in love with the story and with the artwork. And there was just this light bulb moment when I was reading this one scene where Kamala goes to her imam at a mosque, and it's like an area that I grew up in. It's a scene that I recognize, and the artist took the time to make sure the carpets were correct, which nobody would notice unless you kind of grew up in that environment. And it was this moment of like, oh shit, like someone cares that I'm the audience. Someone put this level of effort. And at the same time, this was the #1 selling Marvel comic. And with all of that together and realizing that like art could be accessible to me as a career and how excited I was for it, I decided to switch majors, and the rest was kind of history. And now I've worked on Ms. Marvel, and I've worked on, Avatar: The Last Airbender and all these other IPs that originally encouraged me to learn how to draw. So I would say the first things that really sparked that for me were other teenagers who were drawing and posting their art online, and then folks who could speak directly to my background.
I love that. Nadia, what about you? What's your origin story?
Well, I guess I would say so. I was one of those kids that was like, learned how to read and was like, that's it, I'm going to be a writer. And I was a voracious reader, but I always thought it would be prose or poetry. I was kind of like, I started as a manga reader in middle school. I didn't really get into like Cape Comics, honestly, like Sara said, until Ms. Marvel happened. And I think I was in college when that happened, like maybe my first year. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, I guess like superhero comics have something that interests me at all, because, I was reading manga or like just kind of like indie punk zine shit, right? And then I didn't really think of comics as a career for myself until at some point in college, I got an internship at the Marvel editorial office, and working behind the scenes made me realize how many people it actually took to make a comic, and how many different like ways you could actually be involved in the production of a comic. And it made me realize like, oh, wow, like, no, this is an entire industry and I could be any part of it. And it's ironic because I originally thought that I wanted to be just an editor. And that's because I actually had a really bad experience in my creative writing department in college. So I was like, okay, no, I'll never write again. That's it. But I will, like, I love books still, so I want to help people edit. And then I put together a Kickstarter anthology called Corpus to kind of like prove my chops after that Marvel internship as kind of a comics creator and editor. And I think that's actually how Sara and I kind of met online. Is Sara was doing Boy Bye at the same time that I was kind of doing Corpus, right? Yeah. And then we kind of were like, oh shit, like Arab woman over there. Whoa, because and then so from there, but then it's funny because after doing Corpus, I realized that actually I did want to make books again. And while I was clawing that over, Sara reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to do a book? And that was kind of when I made the decision of like, yeah, all right, I'm going to give writing comics like a real shot here. And that's kind of how it went down.
I love that there's such similarities there of neither one of you sort of saw comics as this viable route. And then through the same work, it kind of came to you both. So how has your sort of perception of the comics industry changed from what you thought before then? And now that you're sort of embroiled in it, obviously it's become a big part, but how has your perspective of it changed?
It's really interesting to go from a reader to someone who's like behind the scenes and creating and working directly with you realize the folks who've made your favorite stories are truly not that far away. When G. Willow Wilson first ever liked a tweet of mine, I think I was actually jumping for joy. I like called my friend and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I love her work, her favorite stories. And then we went from that to just a couple of years later, texting ideas over a comic that we were both working on, and catching brunch with each other at Emerald City Comic Con. Like, you need to accept that if you really are trying to make this your career, you have to not put your heroes on pedestals, but embrace them and understand like, these are the folks you want to work alongside. So don't think you're not ready for it. Don't beat yourself up for it. Try to kind of approach everyone respectfully, friendly, and you'd be surprised what opportunities open up for you.
Mm-hmm. Nadia, anything to add to that about sort of your change in the industry, how you perceived it before and after, or how and now?
Oh man, I think that's like such actually an interesting and big question, because I think the biggest difference I noticed was in conventions, because I was that person at cons who was like on every signing line, like every line, like just was there at like 6 a.m. at Javits, like standing, hoping to get a wristband so I could do something or get into like the Batman family panel in like 2014 or whatever, like, you know what I mean? It was like I was that person and I was so starry-eyed. And now thinking of going to the Javits is like I'm being taken out back to get shot. I'm like, oh my God, not the Javits. And it's just like, what that kind of transition of kind of, it changed my relation. Like, I think the biggest thing that changed was my relationship to comics in general, is that like I had to have like this period where I like rediscovered my love for comics through manga. Ironically, I just started reading like just a shit ton of manga, and I was like, okay, I liked this. I did love this. I remember that now, because it's so easy to kind of get embroiled in all of the like bullshit of the industry. But yeah,
at the end of the day, work's work, deadlines are deadlines.
Basically. And it's sort of like when I learned how to create, like, I learned that comics, because comics was my whole life when I was trying to break into the comics industry. And now I'm learning that comics is not my whole life. And that's when it becomes when it does actually become your whole life, you have to find other places in your life for your life, because before you're like, it is your life in your head, but like that's because you're trying to like be in. But I think now on the other side of releasing my first graphic novel, I'm like, I have to find places for me now outside of comics.
That's so interesting. And you brought up something else I wanted to touch on, which is sort of this notion of breaking in, because when you're not there, it feels so far away. And some people, they don't even know when that moment is, if it's happened yet. So Nadia, I want to start with you.
Yeah.
When did sort of the idea of working in comics regularly become a reality? And do you feel like you've broken in? Was there a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm here now?
That moment happened definitely. Honestly, I'm so embarrassed to say this, but that I didn't realize I didn't have that moment of like, I did it, I'm in comics, until we won the Harvey Award. And that's when I was like, oh wow,
yeah,
I'm in comics. You know what I mean? Like, I looked down, I was like, whoa, I guess I did it, it didn't. That's the thing, is that like I use the term breaking in, but it's such a weird little term because it's not real, and it's it's just not real. But also, like, that feeling doesn't come. There are still times I have to remind myself of like, you're not, my partner calls it like, oh no, I'm so small, and you're like, and I'm like, all right, stop doing that. You're not small anymore. You're like a competent comic creator who like can put their foot down. You know what I mean? So it's sort of, yeah, that's an ongoing thing. But I would say that I didn't really realize how it was until that moment for me.
Sara, what about you?
I'm on the other side of the spectrum. I'm a fake it till you make it kind of girl. So for me, I was like, I'm just gonna assume until someone explicitly tells me otherwise, and I think that worked for me perfectly fine. And it's easier for me to have blind confidence than any little shred of a doubt. I think we definitely made for an interesting combination when we were pitching our work. and telling folks about Squire.
But I do tell people all the time. Like, I will say, I want to talk about all this with the caveat that I've changed so tremendously as a person over the production of Squire. And a big part of that was Sara, was because Sara's like, don't give a fuck attitude, completely contagious, totally ruined me, because I'm like that now. Whereas, so like I'm just like, okay, let's get like, oh, you gave me this award, you're a mistake, bastards, I'm only gonna get weirder now, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, like I think Sara's attitude during pitching, I was so scared, and I was like, what if they don't like it? Sara was like, fuck them, but I was like, maybe fuck them actually.
But like, who cares if they don't like us? Like, somebody will. Like, we like it, so somebody else out there is gonna like it. I feel like that's also generally my advice to all emerging artists. I do a lot of portfolio reviews for students at universities, and by the time they get through their 4 years of art school, they're like coming to me all shaken and scared, and I'm like, it's gonna be all right. Some folks are not going to be into your stuff. That's life. Like, but you have to be so into your own work first and foremost. And if you can get to that point, everything else can be figured out. I'm all about a little delusion. I don't care.
No, it's totally true. I think that it's, the more stuff I make, the more I realize that like the only stuff that I truly, feel for is like the stuff that's so specific in vision, the stuff that's just someone like laying it out there of being like, this is the weirdest little thing in my mind, and here it is, and it's part of my soul, and no one else could make it. And I'm like, yeah, like, and that's all, that's important. That's beautiful. It doesn't matter how weird you think it is. Someone else is going to point at that and be like, absolutely.
Jam. Yeah. And maybe
Yeah.
it's just, 2 readers, maybe it's 12 readers, maybe it's 1,200, maybe it's 12,000, who cares? It's still worth making.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you've touched on this a little already, but I want to get to how you two came together, because it feels like it was a natural fit. But what was it, sort of just one of you reached out and then it was just like, boom, we're working together?
So I was in my 3rd year of art school when I had first developed Squire, which was, you can see some of the concept art in the back of the book of that inkling of what it used to be. And that was kind of like a homework assignment for me that I took pretty seriously, and I really wanted to sit down and think like, what sort of stories am I interested in? And I had a really good instructor and mentor who pushed me to kind of like tap into stuff that would be my jam specifically. So I was doing research and looking at my own heritage in a way that I'd never done before in art. And when you do work like that, it's a very vulnerable space, because you're saying, hey, this is a piece of me. I hope you like it, and that can really make or break an artist sometimes. But at the same time, I was posting my work on Twitter while I was developing this kind of concept, and I got the attention of an editor at HarperCollins who emailed me out of the blue and said, hey, let's hop on a phone call. I think you got some cool ideas, and I want to know if you're interested in doing some stories. And so I had a small freak out, and then I got on the phone and I talked to him, and he was basically like, do you want to do a book? And I said, no, because that sounds like a lot of work. And he was like, you're right, it is, but you should still think about it and call me after you're done, with art school. And I was like, do I have to graduate? And he said, yes. And I was like, all right, fine. And then 2 weeks later, I had one of my artworks go viral on Twitter. And all of a sudden I had an agent in my email inbox being like, hey, do you want to do a book? And I was like, all right, that's 2 in a month. That's a sign if I've ever seen one. And but I told him the same thing. I was like, I don't know, that sounds like a lot of work. I don't know if I'm up for that. I've never done anything more than like a 10-page comic. And so I was like, I'm gonna need help, because my thoughts don't do well inside of my own brain. I have to talk them out loud with another person. At my core, I am a collaborator. And so I looked around and I was like, who out here is in a similar position as me? Who's young and hungry and scrappy? And who do I not have to explain anime references to? And as I was doing kind of a Kickstarter project of my own, just to kind of put myself out there and see if I could do it, Nadia was doing something very similar. So we're both kind of similar age range. We both have like a little bit of experience, a couple credits here and there. And I hit her up and I said, hey, do you want to do a book? I think I have a couple opportunities come up, and I think I need a team member. I need a partner in this. And that day we talked for like 4 hours on the phone.
Yeah, it started with like just a talk of like, before we even decide like whether we want to do this book, is like, hey, what are your like touchstones? And we just talked about all the stuff we liked and the stuff that we like have always dreamed about making. And yeah, it turned out like we made sure that we were kind of aligned there before we like kind of took the plunge. And then when we took the plunge, we spent like a few months that are just world building and concept building. And Sara was going to Turkey and Jordan at that time as well, and like did like a bunch of photographic like research basically while on a trip with her family. And
I hijacked the family vacation.
Yeah. And then Sara even
research.
came to New York, and we like plotted out the end of Squire on a table. There was like a paper table in my neighborhood at an Italian restaurant. We like didn't eat anything. We just sat there for 3 hours. So yeah, it was totally yeah, when Sara reached out, I was in my own place of like, do I want to continue doing this? So then when Sara reached out and I realized that like, hey, we have the same touchstones, I was like, no, let's just swing for it. And we just from there like went full throttle, like whatever we wanted to do, we kind of carved out that road together to what Squire ended up being. Yeah.
And Sara, I want to bounce this back to you because you had mentioned how you were working on this and then you got interest from an editor and from an agent. So did this project feel different to you than other things you'd worked on before you got those sort of external validations for it?
Absolutely. I had not really, I'd not really done so much thinking and so much research and really gotten attached to these characters like I had any other project I'd done up until that point. And again, part of it as well is because like I was allowing myself room to explore concepts and ideas that previously I felt like I wasn't allowed to, for lack of a better word. It's hard to explain, but when you're in art school, you kind of have a chip on your shoulder. You're like, I want to prove that I can draw first and foremost. And then you reach a point where you're like, okay, well, I can draw, but now what do I want to say? And a lot of artists can get stuck at that point. And you can make a decision of, well, I'm just here to execute other people's ideas, or you can buckle down and say, no, I have ideas of my own, actually. So with Squire, I was tapping into something that was really, really self-indulgent for me. I love history. I love research. I am a big fan of fantasy. So I was kind of like writing a love letter to all the things that even encouraged me to be an artist from day one. You know, Arthurian legends and elves and orcs, and it was a lot more high fantasy at the very beginning. And then as I was talking with Nadia and we were sitting down and really being honest about what stories we were most interested in telling, we realized that it was one more relevant to our own experiences growing up Arab American, and like the experiences of having army propaganda breathing down your neck at all times. And at the same time being told that not only do you need to be part of solving the problem of the scary Arabs, you have to prove to us you aren't a scary Arab.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting because from Sara's original concept art, I think almost nothing stayed the same except for Daruk. I've like because he was just too good of a character to throw away. I looked at that boy and I was like, absolutely. but yeah, I think that that's kind of the funny thing is that we started just kind of, we built the world out first, because we were like, I think that the world influences character. You know what I mean? We are all products of the worlds we're in. And there's this quote that I never remember who said it that says geography is destiny. So it was really important for us to kind of like really understand the parameters and political implications of this kind of world we were creating, very similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender, which we talked about, like Avatar: The Last Airbender and Full Metal Alchemist as the two biggest like touchstones of our youth that we really wanted to kind of like be in the vein of. So, you know, in fact, like
common thread with those two is that they both involved very young characters, without ever talking down to the young audience who might be reading it. No one, you know, softened the blow when it came to the shit we were growing up with, the prejudice we were growing up with. And kids can handle those stories, whether they signed up for it in their real lives or whether they're signing up for it in their fiction. They actually can handle them, and there's no need to soften it. So when we were thinking of, you know, what were some of the themes in Squire, we didn't want to pull any punches, and we saw clear examples through anime, manga, popular media.
Yeah. We ended up, I ended up like literally drawing like a rudimentary map that was included in our pitches to help us also understand like the borders and the geographical implications of where our characters were coming from and the social and class implications of where our characters were coming from, also to understand like the world of Squire. We spent quite a bit of time with it before we were able to kind of carve out our characters out of kind of a combination of like what are our favorite character tropes and also what do we want to say specifically about the way that kids are impacted by a growing wave of nationalism? How does that indoctrinate them and kind of cause the way they interact with each other to change? So
You
yeah,
don't wake up a racist adult.
exactly. Yeah. So we kind of wanted it to be about this group of kids whose relationship to each other changes as a result of what was happening and what was being taught at the military camp they were at.
Mm-hmm.
You both brought up so many things I want to get back to. I want to start with the talk about the setting and the world building of it. Obviously such a huge part of this story. So what was the back and forth like? Like, were you building this world from scratch, or you were drawing from history? How did you sort of settle on what
definitely history. We both are huge history buffs, and for me especially, like, I was pulling from a lot of Ottoman and Byzantine history. The script even included like links, videos from like, and Sara did like historical archive research from like New York Public Library and whatnot into like illustrations and drawings, I remember. And yeah,
we
so
also made a very conscious decision of what kind of fantasy we want to go into. Like, we're sort of in an alternate history rather than full-on fantasy in the series. And it was very intentional decisions to choose landscapes that people would recognize. Like Petra, for example, from Jordan, which is where my family's from, is prominently featured in the book. And if you go to Petra, it looks like something out of a fantasy novel. And that's true for a lot of inspiration for, our, biggest fantasy stories. Like, we know what some of these locations are in Game of Thrones, but no one seems to blink twice, and we're it being fantasy when it's contextualized that way.
And it's also interesting because often, they'll film like otherworldly or Mars, kind of like alien hostile environment in the Middle East. And we wanted to, especially in our book, is that like we wanted to show Petra in the desert, but we also wanted to show that the Middle East has this vast variety of landscapes and this vast variety as a result of like ethnic groups and cultural habits, so it's, and kind of to present that like multicultural reality that we already know this about the United States, right? Like, we know that like there's a bunch of people and different regions affect the way different people live, but we never view other countries, especially countries in Asia and the Middle East and Africa, to be as multicultural and individual, even though they are. So I think that was another big thing of our world, is to like kind of really celebrate the diversity of the Middle East and to make it not a background to an alien or hostile place, but in fact like a very warm and lively place,
And you had mentioned how it had started off as a high fantasy. Was that the inspiration to sort of move it away from a high fantasy to make it more of a realistic depiction of what it's like?
I think so.
It also tied to the fact of the kind of story we're interested in telling. Like, we started kind of character first as well. For me, I have a lot of fun drawing environments, and I almost want them to be another character in the book. And you can see a lot of like really wide shots that we painted and drew throughout the book. And I don't know, but first and foremost, my goal as an artist is always like, well, what's coolest? And for me, that was coolest. So I don't even need to intellectualize it beyond that.
I love it. So you've talked about character a little bit. I want to dig more into character because I'm somebody who reads for character. That's the first thing that draws me into a story. And the characters here are just so well done. So I want to ask you both about sort of the inspirations behind both Isa and the rest of the cast, because it's an ensemble, essentially. She's the main character, but there are more there. So what was sort of the inspiration behind her? And was it always going to be an ensemble, or did these people get added along the way? Tossing it up.
The ensemble grew as we were developing the pitch. For example, our kind of Draco Malfoy character, Bassem, sort of came a little bit longer when we got feedback being like, all right, well, we have this group of kids, but let's have someone who's kind of antagonistic without being the bad guy. Like, you have to show that range. And what we really want to do, this cast of characters, of like, what are the different reasons why people would join the army? Is it for family legacy? Is it for prestige? Is it because you just have no other opportunities? And those kids kind of represented those different motivations very, very clearly. And from there, we kind of had them interact and play out in the world and show how complex and how muddy these kind of conversations about war and about countries and identity can really be.
Yeah, we definitely, we kind of, Isa was pretty quick. I think both of us knew that we wanted it to be like a younger girl and we wanted her to be very fiery. I think that like we both kind of love the like small and angry trope, like very shonen.
To be the runt
Yeah.
of the litter. She had to,
Yeah.
like, from the character design perspective, be so obviously not the hero, not
Yeah.
up to task. Like you had to look at this like scrawny little kid and be like, oh, they're gonna eat you.
Yeah.
You're not gonna last, kid.
Yeah. I think that she was first, and from there we just like, yeah, it was easy. I think the characters were kind of on the easier side because of, one, because we did so much world building, it was so easy to kind of root them like in this world and to understand their motivations, and also to just go like yeah, no, we're both big fans, so we went tropey. I was like, ooh, I want like a delicate little boy and I want a strong giant girl, you know what I mean? We were just like, you know,
it was fun to play against expectations, because there is every single character in this book thinks they're the main character.
Yeah.
And we could write this book from the perspective of each of them as if they were the main character. Like if we sat down with Husni, it's about, you know, a kid who falls in love with the mythology and the dream of the knights and the swords and all of that, only to realize it's all dusty, awful, hard work. You know, we're taking the view of the General Hind who's had to betray her own mentor and all of this traumatic stuff, but we have little glimpses to show these moments. We can't dive into each and every single one of them.
They have to, you know, they all have to be people. I think that that's the thing, is that like they have to be people presented with a situation and with a history and a legacy and a point of view. And then what happens next is what happens next. You know, they have to be, they have to, you know, they have to be wholehearted and rounded. Like I needed, like General Hind, you know, it's funny, I have been asked a few times now if that was like the most difficult character to write, and honestly the easiest, because I've heard her rhetoric so much. Like that was the rhetoric we were all raised in the 2000s. So like, of course, you know, what about that is strange or difficult to do? You know what I mean? It's like I completely understand how she would think she's right and like why she feels this way. You know what I mean? Her empire is in decline. She's flailing, you know, like that's kind of the thing. So
it was a lot of fun for me to also, from a character design perspective, really think about how I can make sure each character is extremely distinct on the page. Sometimes all I have is half an inch of page space to show that a character is there. So they all had to have very specific silhouettes. I wanted them to carry themselves differently. They're all in uniforms, and I had to come up with a uniform that would work for all these body types while also feeling, you know, a little historically informed. So that was a really
customizable.
Yeah, and something that would work for action scenes as well as more serious moments and nighttime as well as daytime. So it's a lot of problem solving when you're coming up with an ensemble.
And then, you know, you both talked about how these were easy enough characters to fall into. How much of their background did you know? Obviously, it doesn't all come across on the page, but did you know these characters pretty deeply before you started writing them, or did it sort of develop along the way?
I think their voices, I think we definitely knew them pretty well, but I definitely think that, you know, their voices, this is the first book I have ever written. It was my first long-term book, very similar to Sara. I had only done like maybe max 10-page comics before that. So I think their voices were definitely a thing that like I had to, that developed as the book kept going on, because I started to, as the more time I spent writing them, the more time I spent hearing them. And now hearing a character's voice in my head is such an essential part of being able to write a script and I think that was because I spent so much time trying to figure out what the Squire kids sounded like. You know,
I like that. So I want to transition into talking about sort of the publishing side of it, pitching it, but there are two questions I wanted to get to first. First one, really love the work that both of you create. My question is, do you have any tips for college students who want to break into the industry in terms of navigating a future in comics and storytelling?
Yeah, first things first is don't feel like you have to wait until after you're done with college to feel like you have to get started. The sooner you kind of let go of that, like, I'm a student sort of mentality, the better. The day you are professional is the day you kind of decide to be a professional. So, whip up that Twitter, polish up that portfolio site, make sure your email is really easy to access, and be very specific about the kind of work you're interested in doing. The number one sign for me of an artist who is emerging and is kind of new to it is they try to be a jack of all trades. I don't need to see everything that you're capable of doing. We all have, artist skill sets. I want to see what you are specifically interested in doing, and I want you to stick to it. Better to have a few very, very strong pieces in your portfolio, very specific ones, than trying to cram in everything you did in the past 3 years of your college career.
I would say that building a community is a really, really important part of being a creator. I think that a mistake that a lot of people do is they try to aim directly very high because they think that that gives them a better chance of being published or something, but that's really not how it works at all. I think that you should find people who are creating, who are like-minded, whose work you're excited about, who are on the same level as you, because those are the people who are going to be around you forever, who you're going to all push each other to be better, who are going to kind of inspire you and be there for you. I think that, cons are so great for me because despite how exhausting they are, I get so inspired seeing the work other people are making. So I think that find your people and don't worry about it.
Join a Discord,
Yeah.
poke around online. I met Nadia through Twitter. I met so many of my collaborators and all of my opportunities online. You kind of have to be where people are. And sometimes that is just in online spaces, and treat folks as you would if you ran into them in a convention.
Yeah.
Your opportunities are going to come from your friend who maybe they're on their first ever gig and they realize they need a colorist last minute. That was how I got into comics. Or it's going to be a friend who maybe they got their first opportunity and they got a table at New York Comic Con and they need someone else to split the table with them. And then you start talking to people there. You start realizing that stuff pops up. It's not like a trickle down process, but it's much rather like everyone reaching back and helping their friend to come up too.
Thank you both. And then next question, talking about being influenced by other series, have you ever found yourself working on something and you suddenly realize parts are too similar to other series? And if so, how did you solve that? Because that is a problem I come across.
It may be helpful to indulge in stories and movies and mediums that otherwise you might not have been interested in before. For example, if you want to make comics, you can't just read comics, or else your stuff is going to end up sounding like a lot of other stuff there. And your favorite comic creators, they're not just reading comics, they're reading literature and listening to music and watching movies and doing photography. And you have to kind of take all of that sensory input, all of that raw information and influence, and then you have your perspective that you're bringing into comics. So if you feel like someone else has already done it better and you feel like you couldn't come up with a better story than that, your ceiling is too low. And you gotta get inspired by other stuff you maybe not have considered before. That's how I interpret it. But also, like, tropes are a thing. It's not a bad thing to have a similar story. Like, we seek out similar stories. We literally describe this book as Avatar: The Last Airbender meets Mulan. We need a touch point to base it off of.
I think that that's really, really great advice. I think that if you only read comics, or especially one kind of comic, you are going to sound like you are going to sound like that. I think that something I try to do is if I'm working on something, I try to actively avoid anything that might be even similar. If I haven't read it already, I don't know if that's helpful. Honestly, I think Sara's advice is so good. But the thing that came to mind for me was when I was writing Squire. Sara, you were reading City of Brass, I think.
Yeah.
And
I wouldn't touch comics, but I would read books and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, I want to read it so bad because it's also like a Middle Eastern fantasy, but I know I cannot look at a word of that, or else I will be so scared of doing it again in my script. So I like didn't read any of that series at all until after I finished Squire. So I guess it's like, and the thing is that's not to say like avoid the, because obviously write and create the things that you love and that you are working, the more you kind of know about your genre, the more tropes you can play with. But I think that it's like there's a difference between playing with those tropes and being like, well, I want to recreate the feeling or this exact scene. It's like you don't need to recreate that scene to recreate the feeling that that scene had inside you. I think that that's kind of where you need to go in and be like, what about, if you find that that scene is very similar, be like, what about this scene is speaking to me so much? What is it that I am trying to achieve by using this same scene? And then kind of working backwards might help you figure out a different way to achieve the same reaction or evoke the same feeling. That's for that like specific thing. Yeah.
One thing as well, I wouldn't say avoid stuff you like, but also read stuff you don't like, watch stuff you don't like. You learn a lot through critique, and you learn a lot by being like, okay, I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is, and this is how I would have made this scene better. This is how I would have like done the end of this comic better.
That's really true.
And you learn a lot of just being like very critical and conscious of what you enjoy and what you don't. It is a practice that I do a lot with emerging artists, of just having them explain back to me what they like in their own artwork, and then seeing if they can spot that in other stuff they've done.
Awesome. Thank you both. And now we're going to talk a bit about the pitching process. Obviously, you got an agent from this. You went the traditional publishing route with it, but sort of take us through, I mean, I know this is a big question, but like the moment you started to get into the marketing mind of getting it out there, why did you decide to sign with an agent? Had you considered going the indie route, Kickstarter route, all that good stuff?
I'm a capitalist, baby. I'm always in that marketing mindset. So for me, I knew I wanted to do YA. And if you want to do YA, you got to end up in libraries and public schools. And it was really important to me that this book would be accessible to that young audience who, they don't have $20 to throw out a book every time they want to read. So traditional publishing is the route for that. And, maybe I could have made a pretty penny from Kickstarter, but that wasn't going to get the book where I wanted it to go. And I've done Kickstarter, I've done creator-owned work, and I really, really love it. And this is not a dig at that. It's just different routes for different goals. So for me, Squire was just a bunch of concept illustrations. It wasn't anything more than this kind of loose idea, but that was enough to kind of get some people's attention. And then from there, with my agent, he sort of coached me through how to put together a pitch. So the first thing that you want to do is you want like the elevator pitch, right? So you have in one sentence, what is this book? And then you have another paragraph that says a little bit more about the story and a little bit more about you as a creator. And then from there, you kind of write down everything that happens in your story. First, this happens, then she goes here, then she goes there, and then we have this reveal, very point to point, this is the plot. From there, you have a bit of a character summaries, you show your character art, and then the most important thing is you have your sample pages. So you cannot draw an entire graphic novel and try to sell that, because the teams in those publishing houses, they want to make edits, they want you to change things, they want to have some say in what they're going to sell. So you show them that you are the best person for your story. You show them a little excerpt, ideally a scene that flexes how well you do character acting, how well you do environments. If you're doing your own lettering and design, like include that, or hire a friend to help you do that. And then you also want to write up a little bit about like why you are the best person to write this story. So for me and Nadia, it was a very personal thing. We both did a lot of research for it. I went to Jordan and Turkey, and I did my own photo references, and I talked about how I was very intentionally using these designs. It wasn't just aesthetics. It had a lot of weight and meaning to the story. So I got very personal about it. So you're not just selling your story, you're selling yourself as a creator. And if you have that together, you have a pretty strong pitch.
Nadia,
Yeah.
anything to add?
That was pretty comprehensive. And I would say that, yeah, I started off in self-publishing. I've done, the little zines that you make yourself. I've had books printed. I had Corpus, the anthology I mentioned, was a 300-page full color printed book that also had a hardcover edition. And I did that entire Kickstarter myself, which means that I was there from beginning to end, and I learned a lot about book publishing and the practicality, physicality, and financial realities. Especially learned about it when a ship full of those books sank to the bottom of the ocean. And then they had to and then I was like, please, can I have more? I have to sell.
And that's the reason why.
And that's economics. And no, that's the thing. I'm I guess what I'm saying is that that's the kind of reality and the practicality, right? As I decided, when I started doing the pitch with Sara, Sara's agent then reached out to me and was like, do you want me to represent you as well? I was like, yeah. And then from there, I was like, the truth is that I have done self-publishing. I think that there are certain projects or ideas that self-publishing is better for, but this is one that I wanted as many eyes on as possible. And I wanted to do something that I knew I could not create. I just didn't have the financial or one team or two team possibility of publishing this ourselves. It's just...
Yeah, I didn't get into what happens after you put together the pitch. So I handed that over to my agent. I finished that pitch for Squire literally the night before New York Comic Con, because my agent is like, all these editors, they're going to go shopping in those artist alleys, and they're going to look for all.
And I was at that New York Comic Con too, because I remember we it was there was also 5 pages of sample script, and we had, and Sara made it into this whole PDF. It was this whole packet. And Sara was tinkering with the colors up until the morning of New York Comic Con.
I was on the train from Boston to New York, still tweaking things and still adding things, because they needed it to be in editor's inbox before they went shopping for everybody else. We wanted to be top of the list. Yeah. So we hand that over to our agent. He sends it off to all these publishing houses, and that's kind of why you have to be agented. Otherwise, you might not get your story through the door. That's just the reality of the matter. And then from there, some publishers said, no, we're good. Thanks so much. We'll hear from you again. And other publishers were like, let's have a meeting next week. And then from there, it's very, very rapid fire. We were having maybe 4, 5, 6 meetings.
There was literally, I remember a day I had to take off work because we had I think 8 or 9 public. Yeah, just it's absolutely, I don't even remember how many, but it was a wild amount of publishing calls back to back. And then
yeah, because we would have a call. The reason you say 8 or 9 is because we'd have a call and then a debrief and then a call.
That's
and then
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we were going to all these editors, and all of a sudden your position as a creator has switched, where you've gone from please God, anyone tell me my book is good. And then all of a sudden publishers are coming to you and saying, look at how cool we are. Look at all these things that we can do for you. Oh, I do things the other girl doesn't. And so it was that kind of mindset. And you're like, wait a second, what the hell's happening? This power dynamic has switched, and all of a sudden they want to work for you. And so it was very interesting, because the original editor who started this whole thing by hitting me up and saying, do you want to do a book, ended up coming back in the auction with the highest bid and really, really fighting for it. And so they're not just telling you hey, this is what we can do for you in terms of advances, monetarily. They're also saying, this is what we're going to do for you in marketing. This is our editing team. These are the books we've done. This is who we want to put you next to on a bookshelf. Don't you want to be next to Neil Gaiman? You can be next to Neil Gaiman. They sweet talk you in that way. And you go from there, and you have to make a really informed decision of who do I actually want to work with for 2 years? Because a good editor, will uplift your book, and a mediocre editor won't make you grow anymore. Maybe they're not going to see the message you're actually trying to go for. So we went with the original editor who hit us up. We really felt like he understood the story and what we were going for, and he wanted to support a lot of our decisions that other publishers questioned when we were in meetings with them. So it was very interesting. It was a big learning curve. And we're glad that we don't have to do it as much anymore, but it's interesting. Yeah.
I'm so happy that you ended up going with the same editor. Just because it makes for a great story. This
Yeah.
is the person that came in first, and they were the ones that came through in the end.
Yeah.
What
And it really could have turned out another way, but I was like, nah, he gets it. I'm going with him.
So was that like, because you make the decision making process seem simple enough? I mean, now that it's in hindsight, it's
Damn.
I was just wondering what, like, when you were in the trenches, like, I assume you had conversations with your agent. Like, what was sort of the discussion like when deciding which publisher to go with? You said there were multiple involved. How many were involved? And
I think we had 6 publishing houses.
It was more than that. It was definitely more than that. It was an auction. Yeah.
Or was it 6 who made it to the final day then? Something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it was like 9 publishing houses and then 6 made it to the final day.
I think that's right. And the thing is that like we were looking at, it was tough because there was like at the end there were like 2 editors that really, really charmed us, and it was like a really hard decision to make.
We're going between one publisher who has a lot of experience with putting out comics, really, really popular comics, and they had like 10 other books slated for that year, and HarperCollins, who only has like 2 flagship comics that they do every year. And we ultimately realized that would be an advantage. We weren't going to compete with the people we were next to on a bookshelf, and we were going to have more focused attention on our book. And we were really comforted by that because this was our first book and we wanted, someone to hold our hand a little bit more. In terms of like advances and stuff, everything split down the middle between Nadia and I. Wanted to retain all of the rights. Again, you always want to retain as much rights as possible. So be really, really careful if you're entering a negotiation without an agent there. Really, really try to get someone to read those contracts carefully. They'll try to take your film rights. They'll try to take your translation rights. And these are areas where you can get, a solid chunk of change down the line. So don't overlook them. Even if you never think you're going to have a movie for a million years, like you can still sell those rights to make money. You got to keep it as creator owned as possible. Really, the only thing they own is the right to print and distribute. Everything else is still yours. And that's always good to know.
Mm-hmm. And then we're almost out of time here. So I want to throw it up and ask what's next for both of you. Nadia, let's start with you. What's coming up next? What are you working on? Anything you want to share, promote, anything?
Yeah, well, something else of mine that came out this year, in case you missed it for the horror fans, is an eldritch horror graphic novel called Where Black Stars Rise that I co-created with Marie Enger, which is a modern day reinterpretation of The King in Yellow. Weird horror fans can enjoy that. The other thing that I'm doing right now is that I'm actually working like Sara in games, and I'm working on a game called Thirsty Suitors, which is a lot like, what if Scott Pilgrim was about a queer Sri Lankan Indian girl who kind of blew up her life and then has to go back home to her gossipy Pacific Northwest hometown and fight all of her exes and also her entire family. Not like fight, but like also fight, because it is an RPG fight, but really they're talking. They're not arguing. Everything's fine. But and that's like a comedy action game, and I'm honestly having a really great time working on that. So I would say it's coming out this year, so everyone check that out. And I have a horror comedy YA book called Confetti Realms, which is also coming out, I think, in the fall of this year. Oh my god, I almost forgot. Dead by Daylight, the comic series. Also, wow, I'm doing a lot of horror lately. Also a horror comic with Titan.
When me and Nadia aren't together, she's doing horror. That's just the same.
I
refuse to.
It's so funny because I really have posted once that meme that was like, my entire career is that one Sabrina and then the demon goat head. And it's like my fun YA work and then my horror work. But anyway, Dead by Daylight, fans of the game might know the character The Legion, and I'm writing that for Titan Comics. And the first issue of that is coming out in April 2023. And it is a 90s slasher, eldritch, dirtbag punk teens and the middle of Canada, get up to some shenanigans.
That all sounds amazing.
Okay.
Sara, what about you?
Thank God I'm doing so much less than that. I just finished only a couple weeks ago my first ever picture book, so I'm going actually a younger demographic. While Nadia's decapitating heads and all that, I am doing sparkles and figure skating. I'm doing Not Yet, the story of an unlikely skater, about the true story of the first athlete to have entered and competed internationally in a hijab. And this is her story as a kid, similar to Isa, you know, being told she can't do something. And of course, that only makes her want to do it more. And other than that, I am very hard at work at One More Multiverse, which is my tabletop role-playing game company. And you can check us out at multiverse.com. That is the main place you can find me nowadays.
Awesome. I have to ask, is Squire, is there going to be any more Squire, or was it a one and done?
We're thinking about it.
We're talking.
Thinking about it. It's not off the table. Listen, it's just so much work, you know, it's a lot. I did a full color comic. I shouldn't have, but we did that. It's like 9 characters. So if you're going to do your first book, word of advice, don't have like 9 main characters. Why would you do that? So we're thinking about it, but it's probably not going to be for a hot minute.
Yeah. It took, just for the timeline, we started talking about Squire in 2018. Yeah. And it came out in March 2022. So,
it takes a minute.
It is a 300-page book. It took a minute. And I gave Sara a lot of very difficult things to draw.
And I'm still in there, like, amazing. Wow.
God, how I managed that. The greatest trick.
Before I let you both go, I want if you could throw out social media, if you want to, if people can, where they can find you, where they can connect with you, that good stuff.
I know a lot of emerging artists and creators are watching this now. If you want to see the pitch for Squire, we're always happy to share it. You can email us. You can find my email on my website, Sara-Alfageeh.com. And I'm at Sara Alfageeh everywhere that you could probably find me.
You can also email me at hi@nadiashammas.com, NADIASHAMMAS. And I am using Instagram right now. I haven't quite figured out what social media I'm going to actually be using from now on, or if I'm going to be using any, because part of me feels like, 2023, right? Like no one's watching. That's the year, because no one is watching. Because I'm not on social media. It's just me and my pottery. And my script.
So ominous.
No one's watching. Right? Like no one's watching. I made it in a good way. But anyway, I don't know. I'm on Instagram right now. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This was a great time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
you.
Of course. To all of our listeners, we'll be back 2 Wednesdays from now, January 18th, I want to say. We have another show there. So you can go to negativespace.com/events and you can sign up there. And thank you again for being here. Have a good night.
Bye, everybody.